The process server's manila envelope felt like ice against my trembling fingers as I stared at the bold black letters. Petition for dissolution of marriage and emergency custody order. My name, Evadne Morel, was typed neatly below Simon's in the plaintiff section. How did it come to this? Just 3 weeks ago, everything seemed manageable. Sure, Simon had been distant lately, sleeping on the couch more often than not, but I figured he'd get over whatever midlife crisis he was having. Men his age always went through these phases. I set the papers on our kitchen counter, the same granite surface where we'd shared coffee every morning for 8 years. The house felt different now, sterile, like a crime scene waiting to be processed. Through the window, I could see our neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, watering her roses, completely oblivious to the legal bomb that had just exploded in my living room. "Mummy," Lila's small voice drifted down the hallway. "Can I have cereal?" My 7-year-old daughter appeared in the doorway, her dark hair tangled from sleep, clutching her stuffed elephant. She looked so much like Simon, with those serious brown eyes and that cautious way of approaching new situations. "Of course, sweetheart." I quickly shuffled the papers under a kitchen towel. "The Cheerios are in the pantry." As Lila climbed onto her step stool to reach the cereal, I noticed how she moved carefully, quietly, like she was afraid of making too much noise. When had she started walking on eggshells in her own home? "Where's Daddy?" she asked, pouring milk with the concentration of a surgeon. "He left early for work," I lied smoothly. The truth was, I hadn't seen Simon since yesterday evening, when he'd announced he was staying at his parents' house for a few days. At the time, I'd rolled my eyes and told him he was being dramatic. Now, staring at those legal papers, I realized he'd been planning this move for weeks. My phone buzzed with a text from my sister Lauren. "How's everything going? Did Simon calm down about the birthday dinner thing?" The birthday dinner. That's when everything started falling apart, though I still couldn't understand why Simon had made such a big deal about it. So what if my boss Bryce had been a little flirtatious? So what if I'd enjoyed the attention? It wasn't like anything actually happened between us. Well, nothing serious anyway. I typed back quickly, Simon's being impossible, staying at his parents like a child. Lauren's response came immediately. "Ugh, typical. You deserve better than his jealous tantrums. Stand your ground." If only it were that simple. I walked to the living room where the couch still bore the imprint of Simon's body from the past 2 weeks of nights he'd spent there instead of in our bed. The throw pillow he'd been using was folded neatly at one end, and his reading glasses sat on the coffee table next to a yellow legal pad covered in his precise handwriting. Curiosity got the better of me. I flipped through the pages, expecting to find work notes or grocery lists. Instead, I found something that made my blood run cold. March 15th. Evie claims working late, but Dina says she left at 4:30 p.m. Phone shows location at downtown cafe until 7 p.m. March 18th says she's at Target, but credit card shows purchase at Victoria's Secret and dinner at Romano's. When asked about dinner, claims she grabbed a sandwich. March 22nd, birthday dinner. Bryce Kellerman overly familiar. Hand on E's thigh during group photo. E poured his wine, ignored family, left with him for one drink after refusing to come home with family. Page after page of dates, times, and discrepancies. My husband, quiet and methodical Simon, had been building a case against me like I was some kind of criminal. The worst part was that reading his notes, I could see how it all looked from the outside, but he was missing the context, the emotional nuance of what I'd been going through. "Mummy, you look sad." Lila had finished her cereal and was standing in the doorway, studying my face with those perceptive eyes. "I'm fine, baby. Just thinking about work stuff." I closed the notebook and forced a smile. "Why don't you go get dressed? We need to leave for school soon." As Lila trudged upstairs, I pulled out my phone and scrolled to Bryce's contact. We hadn't spoken since that awkward text exchange 2 days ago when he'd written, "We should talk," and I'd responded with, "Not now." but maybe he could help me understand how this had spiraled so far out of control. Before I could lose my nerve, I typed, "Can you meet for coffee this morning? Something's happened." His reply came within minutes. "Of course. The usual place? 9 a.m. The usual place. Romano's Cafe on 5th Street, where we'd been meeting for what I'd told myself were innocent conversations about work, life, and the emotional support I wasn't getting at home. When had it become usual? When had we developed routines and inside jokes, and the kind of easy intimacy that apparently looked suspicious enough to document in a legal notebook? I gathered Lila's backpack and lunchbox, going through the motions of our morning routine while my mind raced. Simon had always been the quiet type, the kind of man who observed more than he spoke. I'd fallen in love with his stability, his reliability, the way he could fix any computer problem and remember every important date. But somewhere along the way, that reliability had started feeling like complacency. When Bryce had joined our company 6 months ago as the new regional manager, he'd brought an energy that had been missing from my life. He asked about my weekend plans, complimented my presentations, and actually listened when I talked about my ideas for improving our client services. He made me feel seen in a way I'd forgotten was possible. "Ready, Mummy," Lila called from the top of the stairs. "Coming." I shoved the legal papers into my purse. I'd deal with them after I talked to Bryce. Maybe this was all just Simon's way of getting my attention, a dramatic gesture that would blow over once we sat down and had a real conversation about our marriage. The drive to Lila's school was quiet, except for the radio playing softly in the background. In the rearview mirror, I watched my daughter staring out the window, her small hands folded in her lap. "Are you and Daddy fighting?" she asked suddenly. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Why would you ask that?" "You don't talk to each other anymore, and Daddy sleeps on the couch, and yesterday at Grandma Helen's house, everyone was being weird." Yesterday. Sunday dinner at Simon's parents' house, where his mother Helen had watched me with those sharp grey eyes that seemed to see right through every excuse I'd ever made, where his father Martin had tried to keep the conversation light, while the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. "Sometimes grown-ups go through difficult times," I said carefully, "but that doesn't mean we don't love you. Are you getting divorced?" The question hit me like a physical blow. "Lila, honey, why would you ask that?" "Because Tommy's parents got divorced, and he said, first they stopped talking, then his dad moved out, then there were lawyers." I pulled into the school drop-off line, my heart pounding. "Daddy didn't move out. He's just staying with Grandma and Grandpa for a little while." That's what Tommy said too, right before the lawyers came. I turned to look at my daughter, this wise little person who'd apparently been watching our marriage dissolve with the clear-eyed perception that only children possess. "I love you very much, and so does Daddy. Whatever happens, that will never change." She nodded solemnly and climbed out of the car, her backpack almost as big as she was. I watched her walk toward the school entrance, her shoulders straight with the kind of forced bravery that broke my heart. 20 minutes later, I was sitting across from Bryce at our usual table in the back corner of Romano's Cafe. He looked concerned, his dark hair slightly mussed like he'd rushed to meet me. At 40, he had the kind of confident attractiveness that came from knowing exactly who he was and what he wanted. "You look upset," he said, reaching across the table to touch my hand. "What's wrong?" I pulled the legal papers from my purse and slid them across the table. "Simon filed for divorce and emergency custody." Bryce's face went pale as he scanned the documents. "Jesus, Evie, I had no idea he was... we never actually..." "I know." I wrapped my hands around my coffee mug, needing the warmth. "But apparently he's been keeping track of every time we've met, every text message, every inconsistency in what I've told him about where I've been." "This is serious." Bryce set the papers down and leaned back in his chair. "Emergency custody means he's claiming you're an unfit mother." "I'm not unfit." The words came out louder than I'd intended, and several other customers turned to look. I lowered my voice. I made some mistakes, maybe wasn't completely honest about where I was or who I was with, but I'm a good mother. Of course you are. But Bryce's tone was careful now, distant. Look, Evie, I care about you. These past few months have been special, but I can't get dragged into a custody battle. I just finalized my own divorce 6 months ago. The reality of my situation was starting to sink in. Simon wasn't bluffing or having a tantrum. He was methodically dismantling our marriage with the same careful attention to detail he brought to debugging computer code. And I was sitting in a cafe with another man, discussing how to minimize the damage to his reputation. What am I supposed to do? I asked. Bryce was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee. Maybe you should call a lawyer. The law offices of Thornton and Associates occupied the 15th floor of a gleaming downtown building, all glass and steel and intimidating efficiency. I'd managed to get an emergency consultation for that afternoon, though the receptionist had made it clear that fitting me in was a significant favor. Margaret Thornton was a woman in her 50s, with silver hair and the kind of sharp suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. She spread Simon's divorce petition across her mahogany desk like a pathologist examining evidence. Your husband has been thorough, she said after several minutes of reading. Phone records, credit card statements, witness affidavits. This isn't a spur-of-the-moment filing. Witness affidavits? My voice cracked slightly. His mother, Helen Morel, swears that she observed inappropriate behavior between you and a Mr. Bryce Kellerman during a family dinner on March 22nd. She describes physical contact, excessive alcohol consumption, and your departure from the family gathering with Mr. Kellerman, despite your husband's objections. I felt heat rise in my cheeks. It wasn't like that. Bryce is my boss. We were discussing a work project. Margaret's expression remained neutral. At a family birthday celebration. It came up in conversation, and I didn't have excessive alcohol. I had 2 glasses of wine, maybe 3. According to the restaurant receipt your husband obtained, your table ordered 6 bottles of wine for 8 people. The server's statement indicates that you personally opened and poured most of the bottles, with particular attention to Mr. Kellerman's glass. How had Simon gotten a statement from our server? I remembered the young woman, blonde and efficient, but I'd barely interacted with her. That doesn't prove anything. Mrs. Morel, I need you to be completely honest with me. Have you had any physical relationship with Mr. Kellerman? No. The word came out too quickly. I mean, we haven't slept together. But there has been physical contact. I thought about Bryce's hand on my back when he'd walked me to my car last week. The way he'd hugged me goodbye after our coffee meetings, holding on just a little longer than necessary. The kiss on my cheek that had landed closer to my lips than strictly appropriate. Nothing serious, I said finally. Margaret made a note on her legal pad. What about emotional intimacy? Private communications, meetings outside of work, sharing personal information about your marriage? Every question felt like a trap. We're friends. He's been supportive during a difficult time in my marriage. How many times per week would you say you communicate with Mr. Kellerman outside of work? I don't know. A few texts here and there. Maybe we grab coffee once a week to discuss projects. Margaret consulted another document. According to the phone records your husband subpoenaed, you and Mr. Kellerman exchanged an average of 47 text messages per day over the past 2 months. That's more communication than most married couples have. 47 messages per day. When she put it like that, it sounded excessive, almost obsessive. But in the moment, those texts had felt natural, necessary even. Good morning messages that brightened my day, funny observations about co-workers, complaints about Simon's emotional distance, encouragement about my ideas and dreams. I need to ask directly, Margaret continued, is there any evidence of physical intimacy that your husband might have discovered? Hotel receipts, photographs, social media posts, anything that could be construed as proof of an affair? My mind raced through the past few months. The afternoon we'd gotten caught in the rain, and Bryce had given me his jacket, which I'd forgotten to return for 3 days. The time we'd run into my neighbor at the cafe, and I'd introduced Bryce as a friend from work without mentioning he was my boss. The birthday card he'd given me with the handwritten note, "To the most amazing woman I know, your husband is lucky to have you." There might be some things that could be misinterpreted, I admitted. Margaret's pen stopped moving. Such as photos from office parties where we're standing close together. Maybe some texts that could be seen as flirtatious if taken out of context. And there was one time. Yes? Last month, when Simon was out of town for his company retreat, Bryce came over to help me fix a problem with my laptop. He stayed for dinner. Lila was there the whole time, so nothing happened, but if Simon found out... Did your daughter mention this visit to her father? I don't think so. I mean, I didn't tell her not to, but it didn't really come up. Margaret set down her pen and looked at me directly. Mrs. Morel, I'm going to be blunt. Your husband has built a compelling case for adultery, even if no physical relationship occurred. The pattern of deception, the emotional affair, the secretive meetings, it's enough to significantly impact both the divorce settlement and custody arrangement. The word adultery hit me like a slap. But I never actually cheated. Legal adultery in this state includes emotional affairs and inappropriate relationships that damage the marriage. The question isn't whether you had sex with Mr. Kellerman. The question is whether your relationship with him constituted a betrayal of your marriage vows. I slumped in my chair, feeling the weight of the past few months settling on my shoulders. What does this mean for Lila? Your husband is seeking primary custody with supervised visitation for you. Given the evidence he's presented, that's not an unreasonable request from the court's perspective. Supervised visitation? I'm her mother. You're her mother who has been engaging in deceptive behavior and prioritizing an inappropriate relationship over family stability. The court's primary concern is the child's welfare. I left the law office 2 hours later with a retainer agreement that would drain my savings account and a growing sense that my carefully constructed life was crumbling faster than I could rebuild it. Margaret had given me homework: compile a list of every interaction with Bryce, every lie I'd told Simon, every piece of evidence that might surface during discovery. My phone buzzed with a text from Lauren. "How did it go with the lawyer?" I typed back, "Worse than I thought. Simon has evidence of everything." Evidence of what? You didn't actually cheat. That was the problem with my sister. Lauren saw the world in black and white, where anything short of actual sex wasn't really cheating. She'd been encouraging my friendship with Bryce from the beginning, insisting that I deserved someone who appreciated me. Instead of responding, I called Dina, my closest friend at work. She answered on the first ring. "Girl, you sound terrible. What's wrong?" "Simon filed for divorce, and he's been tracking everything. Every time I've met Bryce, every text message, every lie I've told about where I was." "Oh, shit." Dina was quiet for a moment. "How much does he know?" "Everything, apparently." "Dina, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. When Simon called the office last week asking if I was there, what exactly did you tell him?" Another pause. "I told him you'd left for a dentist appointment. That's what you told me to say." "But I didn't have a dentist appointment." "I know that. You were meeting Bryce at that cafe, but I wasn't going to tell your husband that." "Did anyone else hear the conversation?" "I don't think so. Why?" "Because somehow Simon knows I lied about the dentist appointment. He has it written down in his notebook with the date and time." "Maybe he called your dentist?" The possibility hadn't occurred to me, but it made perfect sense. Simon, with his methodical approach to problem-solving, would absolutely verify my story by calling Dr. Martinez's office. And when they told him I hadn't been there in 6 months. "Dina, I think I'm in real trouble." "Look, you made some mistakes, but you're not a bad person. Simon's being vindictive and cruel. No man should spy on his wife like that." But even as my friend offered support, I could hear the uncertainty in her voice. Because deep down, we both knew that Simon hadn't been spying on me. He'd been paying attention to his wife's behavior and documenting the inconsistencies. There was a difference, even if I didn't want to admit it. That evening, I sat in my empty house, surrounded by the remnants of a life that had seemed solid just a week ago. Lila was at Simon's parents' house for dinner, a standing Sunday tradition that had apparently continued without me. The silence was deafening. I pulled out my laptop and began the task Margaret had assigned, documenting every interaction with Bryce. What had started as innocent conversations about work had evolved into something more intimate, more secretive. I could see it now, laid out chronologically, like evidence in a criminal case. The first coffee meeting in January, ostensibly to discuss the quarterly reports. The gradual shift from work topics to personal ones. The day he'd asked about my marriage, and I'd confided that Simon and I had been growing apart. The afternoon he'd told me about his divorce and how his ex-wife had never really understood his ambitions. By February, we were texting daily. Good morning messages, lunch invitations, complaints about difficult clients that turned into longer conversations about our dreams and frustrations. I'd started looking forward to his messages more than conversations with my own husband. In March, the boundaries had blurred further. The birthday card with its intimate message, the afternoon in his office when he'd said I was beautiful and I hadn't contradicted him. The way I'd started dressing more carefully on days when I knew I'd see him. And then Simon's birthday dinner, where I'd been so focused on impressing Bryce that I'd ignored my own family. Where I'd laughed too loudly at his jokes and touched his arm when I made points in conversation. Where I'd chosen to leave with him instead of going home with my husband and daughter. Reading through my own behavior, I felt a mixture of shame and defiance. Yes, I'd made mistakes, but Simon had been emotionally unavailable for months before Bryce appeared. Yes, I'd been deceptive, but only because Simon would have overreacted to an innocent friendship. Yes, I'd prioritized Bryce's attention, but only because my husband had stopped giving me any attention at all. My phone rang, interrupting my self-justification spiral. It was Helen, Simon's mother. "Evadne, we need to talk." Her voice was crisp, businesslike, with none of the warmth she'd shown me during the early years of my marriage to her son. "About what?" "About Lila. About this mess you've created. About what happens next." "I don't think that's any of your business, Helen." "It became my business when you decided to humiliate my son in public and traumatize my granddaughter. Lila is staying here tonight. She's confused and upset, and frankly, I'm not sure she should be alone with you right now." The accusation hit me like a physical blow. "I would never hurt Lila." "You already have hurt her. She's been asking questions about why Daddy doesn't live at home anymore, why you and Simon don't talk to each other, why everyone was acting strange at dinner last week. Children aren't stupid, Evadne. They see everything." I sank onto my couch, the weight of Helen's words crushing what remained of my defenses. I never meant for any of this to happen. But it did happen, and now we all have to deal with the consequences. Simon is a good man, a good father. He deserves better than what you've given him. You don't understand what it's been like, being married to someone who barely acknowledges your existence. I understand that marriage requires work from both people. I understand that when you're feeling disconnected from your spouse, you talk to them about it, not run off with your boss. I didn't run off with anyone. You left your husband's birthday dinner to go drinking with another man, in front of your daughter, your in-laws, and your friends. If that's not running off, what would you call it? I had no answer for that, because Helen was right and we both knew it. "Lila will be staying here until this legal matter is resolved," Helen continued. "Simon has already spoken to his attorney about temporary custody arrangements. You can see her, but not alone, and not until you get some help." "What kind of help?" "The kind that helps you understand why a married woman with a 7-year-old daughter thinks it's appropriate to carry on with her boss." The line went dead, leaving me alone with the echo of Helen's judgment and the growing realization that I had lost control of my own narrative. In my mind, I was the misunderstood wife seeking emotional connection. In everyone else's eyes, I was the cheating mother who had prioritized her affair over her family. The next morning brought another process server, this time delivering a temporary restraining order that prohibited me from contacting Bryce outside of essential work communications. Simon's attorney had moved quickly, painting our relationship as harassment and stalking. The legal papers included printed screenshots of our text conversations, 47 messages per day, laid out in stark black and white. Reading our exchanges without the context of emotion and loneliness, I could see how they appeared to an outside observer. Intimate good morning messages, complaints about my marriage, plans to meet secretly, my growing dependence on Bryce's validation and attention. The worst part was a text I'd sent last week. "I wish I'd met you before I got married. My life would be so different." Bryce's response had been diplomatic. "You're a wonderful person, Evie. You deserve to be happy." But my follow-up message was damning. "Sometimes I think about what it would be like if we were together. Really together." I didn't remember writing those words, but there they were, time-stamped and documented. Evidence of my emotional infidelity, my betrayal of my marriage vows, my willingness to prioritize a fantasy over my actual family. At work, the atmosphere was toxic. Word had spread about the legal proceedings, and my co-workers were divided into camps. Dinah and a few others supported my version of events, insisting that Simon was being controlling and vindictive. But the majority seemed to view me with suspicion and judgment. Bryce had been transferred to the regional office, pending resolution of the current situation. His replacement, a stern woman named Patricia Vance, made it clear that my employment was under review. "Personal relationships that interfere with workplace dynamics are unacceptable," she told me during our first meeting. "Regardless of the legal outcome, your judgment has been called into question." "Nothing inappropriate happened at work," I protested. "Mrs. Morel, I've reviewed the IT logs. You and Mr. Kellerman exchanged over 300 personal emails using company servers. You used your work computer to research restaurants for your private meetings. You called in sick twice to meet with him during work hours. If that's not inappropriate workplace behavior, what is?" I had no answer. Each revelation made my behavior look worse, more calculated, more deceptive. The woman I saw reflected in these documents wasn't someone I recognized, or wanted to recognize. That afternoon, I received a call from Margaret Thornton. "We have a problem," she said without preamble. "Your husband's attorney has obtained security footage from your apartment building." "What kind of footage?" "Video of Mr. Kellerman entering your building on March 8th at 6:30 p.m. and leaving at 11:45 p.m. This was the evening you claim he came to fix your laptop while your husband was out of town." My stomach dropped. 5.5 hours. What had started as a simple tech support visit had turned into dinner, wine, and long conversations about our respective marriages. Nothing physical had happened, but 5.5 hours looked like a romantic evening, not a computer repair session. "There's more," Margaret continued. "Hotel security footage from the Marriott downtown shows you and Mr. Kellerman in the lobby bar on March 15th. You told your husband you were shopping at Target that evening." "We just had drinks. We talked about work." "For 3 hours, according to the timestamp, and you paid for a hotel room that night." "What?" The accusation hit me like a physical blow. "I never paid for a hotel room." "Your credit card was charged for a standard room at the Marriott on March 15th. The charge was reversed the next morning, but the initial transaction exists." I racked my brain, trying to remember that evening. Bryce and I had met for drinks after work. We'd talked about his divorce, my marriage problems, the possibility of him taking a position with another company. The conversation had been intense, emotional, charged with an undercurrent of attraction that neither of us had acted on. "I remember now," I said slowly. "Bryce was drinking, and I was worried about him driving home. I offered to get him a room for the night, but he refused. He called an Uber instead. I must have started the reservation process but never completed it. Can you prove that? The charge was reversed, wasn't it? That proves I didn't actually use the room. It proves you didn't check in. It doesn't prove your intentions weren't romantic in nature. Every piece of evidence, even the exculpatory details, seemed to reinforce the narrative of an affair. My good intentions were twisted into deception, my friendship into betrayal, my emotional needs into selfish manipulation. That evening, I drove to Simon's parents' house to see Lila. The restraining order allowed supervised visitation, and Helen had grudgingly agreed to let me take my daughter to dinner at a nearby restaurant. Lila was quiet during the drive, staring out the window with the same serious expression she'd inherited from her father. She'd always been an observant child, but lately her silence felt heavy with unspoken questions. "How was school today?" I asked, trying to inject normalcy into the conversation. "Fine. Did you finish your science project?" "Daddy helped me with it yesterday." The casual mention of Simon's involvement in her daily life was a reminder of how quickly our family structure had shifted. A week ago, I would have been the one helping with homework while Simon worked late. Now I was the outsider, granted limited access to my own daughter's life. At the restaurant, Lila ordered chicken nuggets and picked at them absently. "Mummy, why can't I live at home anymore?" "You're just staying with Grandma and Grandpa for a little while, until Daddy and I work some things out." "Are you getting divorced?" The question I'd been dreading. "We're having some problems, sweetie. Sometimes grown-ups need time to figure things out." "Is it because of the man from your work?" My heart stopped. "What man?" "The one who came to dinner that time when Daddy was away. He was nice. He showed me pictures of his dog." Bryce had shown Lila pictures of his golden retriever, Max. They'd bonded over their shared love of animals, and he'd promised to bring Max to meet her sometime. Another innocent interaction that now seemed loaded with implications. "Did you tell Daddy about that dinner?" I asked carefully. Lila nodded. "He asked me if anyone had visited while he was gone, so I told him about the nice man who fixed your computer. Was that wrong?" "No, baby. You should always tell the truth." But even as I said the words, I realized how hypocritical they sounded. I'd been lying to Simon for months, creating elaborate deceptions to cover my meetings with Bryce. And now my 7-year-old daughter's honesty had provided the final piece of evidence in my husband's case against me. "Are you mad at me?" Lila asked, her eyes filling with tears. "Of course not." I reached across the table to take her small hand. "You didn't do anything wrong. This is all Mommy's fault." "What did you do wrong?" How do you explain emotional infidelity to a 7-year-old? How do you describe the slow erosion of a marriage, the gradual replacement of spousal intimacy with outside validation, the choice to prioritize a fantasy over reality? "I made some bad decisions," I said finally. "I hurt Daddy's feelings, and I wasn't honest about some things. Now we have to figure out how to fix it." "Can you say sorry?" If only it were that simple. "I'm going to try, sweetie, but sometimes sorry isn't enough to fix everything." That night, after returning Lila to her grandparents' house, I sat in my car in their driveway and finally allowed myself to cry. Not the angry tears of someone who felt wronged, but the devastating sobs of someone who finally understood the magnitude of what they'd lost. Simon appeared at the front door, silhouetted by the porch light. For a moment, he just stood there watching me fall apart in my car. Then he walked over and tapped on the window. I rolled it down, wiping my face with the back of my hand. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I know," he said quietly, "but sorry doesn't undo the damage." "Can we talk, please? Just the two of us, without lawyers and legal papers and other people's opinions?" Simon was quiet for a long moment, studying my face in the dim light. "What would be the point, Evie? What could you possibly say that would change anything?" "I could explain why it happened. I could help you understand that it wasn't about you, It was about me feeling lost and invisible, and it was about you choosing him over us, Simon interrupted. Every day for 3 months, you chose him over us. You chose his attention over mine, his validation over our marriage, his company over our family. And when I finally confronted you about it, you chose to lie rather than come clean. I never slept with him. You didn't have to. You gave him everything else. Your time, your emotional energy, your loyalty, your honesty. You saved the lies for me. The accuracy of his assessment was devastating because it was undeniable. I had chosen Bryce again and again in small ways that had accumulated into a massive betrayal. I want to fix this, I said desperately. I want our family back. Our family? Simon's voice was bitter. You destroyed our family the moment you decided that your emotional needs were more important than your marriage vows. Lila has been asking me for weeks why Mommy doesn't love Daddy anymore. How do I explain that to a 7-year-old? I do love you. No, Evie, you love the security I provide, the stability, the comfortable life we built together. But you don't love me. If you loved me, you never would have done this. He turned to walk back to the house, then paused. The custody hearing is next week. My attorney has advised me not to speak to you without legal representation present. This conversation ends now. I watched him disappear into his parents' house, taking with him any hope I'd harbored for reconciliation. The man who had been my husband for 8 years, the father of my child, the person I'd built a life with, was now my legal adversary. And the worst part was that he was right about everything. The family courthouse was the imposing brick building that smelled of old wood and broken dreams. I sat in the hallway outside courtroom 3B, wearing my most conservative suit and trying to project an image of maternal responsibility. Margaret Thornton sat beside me, reviewing her notes one final time. "Remember," she said quietly, "answer only what's asked. Don't volunteer information, don't get defensive, and don't try to justify your actions. The judge wants to see remorse and accountability, not excuses." Across the hallway, Simon sat with his attorney, a sharp-faced woman named Rebecca Walsh, who had a reputation for aggressive family law tactics. He wore a navy suit I'd helped him pick out for a work presentation last year. Back when we were still a team instead of adversaries, Lila was not in the courthouse. Thank God for small mercies. But her voice would be heard through the guardian ad litem, a court-appointed advocate named David Chen, who had interviewed her extensively about her living situation and preferences. All rise for the Honourable Judge Patricia Morrison. Judge Morrison was a woman in her 60s, with silver hair and the kind of stern demeanour that suggested she'd seen every variation of human failure that family court had to offer. She reviewed the case file with methodical precision before looking up at the assembled attorneys. "This is a petition for dissolution of marriage with contested custody arrangements," she began. "I've reviewed the evidence submitted by both parties, and I must say this is one of the more thoroughly documented cases I've seen. Mr. Walsh, you may present your client's case." Simon's attorney stood and launched into a devastating recitation of my behaviour over the past 3 months. Phone records showing 1,247 text messages between Bryce and me. Credit card statements revealing lunches, dinners, and shopping trips I'd lied about. Security footage from my apartment building and the Marriott Hotel. Witness statements from family members, co-workers, and restaurant staff. But the most damaging evidence was the audio recording. "Your Honour, I'd like to play a recording of a phone conversation between the respondent and her sister, Lauren Haskins, made on March 25th, 3 days after the birthday dinner incident." My blood ran cold. I'd forgotten that Simon had installed a call recording app on our home phone after we'd been getting spam calls. The app was supposed to screen for telemarketers, but it recorded all incoming calls. My own voice filled the courtroom, tinny but clearly audible. "Lauren, I don't know what to do. Simon is being completely unreasonable about Bryce." What happened exactly? We went out for drinks after the birthday dinner, and Simon is acting like I committed adultery or something. It was just conversation. Did anything happen between you and Bryce? Not really. I mean, we kissed goodnight, but it was just a peck. And maybe we held hands during dinner, but that's not cheating. Oh, honey, you're in love with him, aren't you? I think I am. He makes me feel alive again, you know? Like I'm worth something. Simon hasn't looked at me the way Bryce does in years. So what are you going to do? I don't know. Maybe I should leave Simon. Maybe this is the universe telling me I'm in the wrong marriage. The recording continued for another 5 minutes, with me detailing my emotional affair, my deceptions, and my growing conviction that I deserve better than my marriage to Simon. Hearing my own words played back in the sterile courtroom environment was devastating. I sounded selfish, entitled, and completely disconnected from the impact of my choices on my family. Judge Morrison's expression remained neutral, but I could see the judgment in her eyes. Ms. Thornton, does your client wish to respond to this evidence? Margaret stood reluctantly. Your Honor, Mrs. Morel acknowledges that she made serious errors in judgment. She's prepared to accept responsibility for her actions and work toward rebuilding trust with her family. Mrs. Morel, please stand. I rose on shaking legs, feeling the weight of everyone's eyes on me. In 30 years on the family court bench, I've seen many marriages end due to infidelity, Judge Morrison said. What disturbs me most about this case is not the affair itself, but the calculated deception involved. You didn't make one mistake in a moment of weakness. You made hundreds of deliberate choices over a period of months to prioritize your relationship with Mr. Kellerman over your obligations to your husband and daughter. Your Honor, I never meant— Mrs. Morel, I'm not finished. Your own recorded words indicate that you view yourself as the victim in this situation, that you believe you deserve better than your marriage. You've shown no genuine remorse, only regret at being caught. The judge consulted her notes before continuing. The guardian ad litem has reported that your daughter Lila is experiencing significant emotional distress. She's been having nightmares, her grades have dropped, and she's expressed fear about making mommy mad if she talks about wanting to live with her father. Each word was a dagger to my heart. I'd told myself that I was protecting Lila by keeping my relationship with Bryce separate from my family life. But children see everything, and my daughter had been absorbing the tension and deception even when I thought I was hiding it. Furthermore, the judge continued, your decision to bring Mr. Kellerman into the family home while your husband was away demonstrates a profound lack of judgment regarding your daughter's welfare and emotional security. He was just helping with my computer. Mrs. Morel, you will not interrupt this court again. The evidence shows that Mr. Kellerman was in your home for over 5 hours, during which time you served dinner and alcohol. Your daughter has told the guardian ad litem that she liked the nice man and was confused about why he visited when Daddy was away. You involved your child in your deception, whether intentionally or not. The courtroom was silent except for the scratch of the court reporter's fingers on her machine. I could feel Simon's eyes on me, but I couldn't bring myself to look at him. Based on the evidence presented and the best interests of the minor child, this court orders the following. Mr. Simon Morel is granted primary physical and legal custody of Lila Morel. Mrs. Evadne Morel is granted supervised visitation every other weekend and 1 evening per week, supervision to be provided by a court-approved third party at Mrs. Morel's expense. The gavel fell, sealing my fate. Supervised visitation. The marital home awarded to Simon, primary custody of our assets, and $500 monthly spousal support for 2 years. The judge's words cut deep. My adultery was marital misconduct. My betrayal had traumatized our daughter. I was a selfish woman who destroyed her family for fleeting gratification. 6 months later, I lived in a small apartment, attending supervised visits with Lila under a social worker's watchful eye. Bryce had vanished. The fantasy dissolved into embarrassment. Simon was happy with someone new, and Lila thrived. I'd been the villain in my own story. Acceptance was my first step toward redemption. For Lila's sake, I'd do the hard work of becoming the mother she deserved.